I was 24, single, and just starting to piece together a life in a new apartment on the outskirts of Seattle when I met her. The neighborhood was quiet, almost two quiet rows of identical houses with neat lawns, kids pedaling bikes in lazy circles, and older couples walking their dogs under the soft hum of streetlights. I'd landed my first real job as a graphic designer, a gig that felt like a lifeline after college, and all I wanted was a place to crash, work, and figure out who I was without the weight of expectations. I wasn't looking for friends, let alone anything resembling drama. But then there was Emily, my next-door neighbor, and everything changed. She lived in the house next to my cramped one-bedroom apartment, a picture-perfect home with a white picket fence, a porch swing that creaked softly in the summer breeze, and a lawn so pristine it could have been ripped from a magazine. Emily was 38, married to Mark, a lawyer in his mid-40s who always seemed to be rushing off in his sleek black car, his tie slightly askew, his phone glued to his ear. The first time I saw her, I was struggling up the stairs with a cardboard box, sweat soaking through my t-shirt, cursing under my breath as I tried to maneuver it through the narrow doorway. She appeared out of nowhere, holding a glass of iced tea, her dark hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders. "Welcome to the chaos," she said with a smile that was warm but carried a hint of something else, something tired, like she was holding up a weight I couldn't see. I took the glass, mumbled a thank you, and tried not to stare. She was beautiful, not in a flashy way, but in a quiet, effortless way that made it hard to look anywhere else. Our conversations started small, just neighborly pleasantries exchanged over the low wooden fence that separated our properties. She'd ask about my job, my sketches, my life back in Ohio, and I'd ask about her garden or the book she was reading, anything to keep her talking. She had this way of listening, really listening, like what I said actually mattered. It wasn't long before those fleeting chats became the highlight of my day. I'd find myself lingering outside, hoping to catch her watering her plants or stepping out to grab the mail. My heart would kick up a notch when I saw her, and I'd curse myself for it. She was married. Untouchable. But every time she laughed at one of my dumb jokes or asked about a drawing I'd mentioned, I felt something shift inside me, something I couldn't name but couldn't ignore either. It was a warm summer night, maybe a month after I'd moved in, when things started to feel different. I was on my tiny balcony, sketching under the glow of a cheap string of fairy lights, when I saw her step outside to water her roses. It was late, past 10 p.m., and the air was thick with the scent of honeysuckle and the hum of crickets. She glanced up, saw me, and waved. "What's keeping you up so late, neighbor?" she called out, her voice light but curious. I held up my sketchbook, and before I knew it, she was leaning over the fence, asking to see what I was working on. I hesitated. My sketches were personal, raw, but something about her made me want to share. I showed her a drawing of a jagged coastline, all sharp lines and stormy waves, and she studied it like it was a masterpiece, her eyes tracing every stroke. "You've got something special," she said softly, and I felt my face heat up. She told me she used to paint, years ago, before life got in the way. I told her about my dream of opening my own studio someday, how it felt like a long shot but kept me going. We talked until the air grew cool, and when she finally said goodnight, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. Those late-night talks became a routine, especially when Mark was working late or out of town for one of his conferences. We'd stand across the fence, sometimes for hours, talking about everything and nothing, neighborhood gossip, our worst bosses, the way the stars looked brighter out here than in the city. There was an ease to it, a rhythm that felt so natural it scared me. But there was also an undercurrent, something unspoken that made my pulse race every time she leaned closer to hear me or laughed a little too long at something I said. I started noticing things, how she never wore her wedding ring when she gardened, how her smile faltered when Mark's car pulled into the driveway. I'd lie awake at night, replaying our conversations, analyzing every word, every glance, wondering if I was imagining the way her eyes lingered on me. I wasn't a homewrecker. I wasn't that guy. But I couldn't stop thinking about her, couldn't stop wanting her, and it was starting to drive me insane. One Friday night, about 2 months in, everything changed. I'd had a brutal day at work. My boss had ripped apart a project I'd poured weeks into, calling it uninspired, and I was out on my balcony, nursing a beer, trying to shake the weight of it. Emily came outside, her hair messy, wearing an oversized sweater that made her look softer, younger, like she'd just rolled out of bed. She asked what was wrong, and I don't know why, but I spilled everything, not just about work, but about how lost I felt, how I wasn't sure I was cut out for this life I was trying to build. She listened, her eyes steady on mine, and when I finished, she said, "You're braver than you think, you know. Most people your age don't even try." Her words hit me like a freight train, not because they were profound, but because of the way she said them, like she saw something in me I couldn't see myself. Our eyes locked, and for a moment, the world fell away. It wasn't just a glance, it was heavy, loaded, like we both knew something we weren't ready to say. I wanted to reach out, to touch her hand, to tell her she was starting to mean everything to me. But I didn't. I couldn't. She was married, and I was just a kid with a stupid crush, right? After that night, things got messy. I started finding excuses to see her, offering to help with her garden, dropping off a coffee I accidentally ordered from the shop down the street. She never turned me away. She'd invite me onto her porch for a quick chat, or we'd end up talking for hours while Mark was gone. I told myself it was nothing, just neighbors being friendly, but I was lying to myself. I was falling for her, hard, and every moment we spent together made it worse. The guilt started creeping in, a heavy knot in my stomach every time I saw Mark's car in the driveway or caught him kissing her cheek as he left for work. I'd lie awake, imagining what he'd do if he knew how I felt, what she'd do if she knew. Would she hate me? Would she laugh it off? Or worse, would she feel the same? There were moments, small, fleeting things, that made me question everything. The way she'd brush my arm when she laughed, the way she'd text me late at night to ask about a drawing I'd mentioned. Once, she sent me a photo of a painting she'd found online, a stormy seascape with wild, crashing waves, and said, "This reminds me of you." I stared at that message for hours, my heart pounding, trying to decode what she meant. Was I the storm? The sea? Or was I just projecting, seeing what I wanted to see? I started noticing cracks in her marriage, little things that didn't add up. She'd talk about Mark in this detached way, like he was a coworker, not a husband. She'd mention arguments they'd had, how he was always working, how they hadn't taken a vacation together in years. Once, she let slip that they slept in separate bedrooms, and my mind went into overdrive. Was she unhappy? Was she staying out of obligation? I wanted to ask, but I was terrified of the answer. One night, everything came to a head. It was past midnight, and I was on my balcony when I saw her sitting on her porch, alone, staring at the stars. She looked broken, her shoulders slumped, her face catching the moonlight in a way that made my chest ache. I called out to her, softly, and she turned. "Can't sleep?" I asked. She shook her head, then said, "Come over. Just for a minute." My heart stopped. I knew I shouldn't go. Every rational part of me screamed to stay put, to keep the fence between us, but I couldn't. I crossed the yard, my pulse hammering, and sat next to her on the porch swing, inches apart, the air thick with something I couldn't name. She told me about her life before Mark, how she'd wanted to be an artist, how she'd given it up when they got married. Her voice was raw, like she was confessing something she'd buried for years. I told her she could still paint, that it wasn't too late. She looked at me, her eyes glistening, and said, "You make me feel like I could." For one unbearable moment, I thought she might lean in. I wanted her to. I hated myself for wanting it. That night changed everything. I couldn't pretend anymore, not to myself, not to her. I was in love with her, and it was eating me alive. Every time I saw her, it was like walking a tightrope. I'd tell myself to stay away, to stop torturing myself, but then she'd text me, or I'd hear her laugh through the window, and I'd be right back where I started. The guilt was suffocating, but the longing was worse. I started wondering if she felt the same, if she was fighting the same battle I was. Our talks got deeper, more personal. She told me about her childhood in a small town, always dreaming of something bigger. I told her about my parents' divorce, how it made me afraid of getting close to anyone. We were peeling back layers, getting closer to something dangerous. One evening, I did something reckless. I bought her a small sketchbook and left it on her porch with a note, "For the artist you still are." The next day, she texted me a simple thank you, but when I saw her later, she hugged me, quick, impulsive, like she couldn't help it. Her arms were warm, and for a second, I let myself imagine a world where that hug meant more. But then she pulled back, her face flushed, and said, "I shouldn't have done that." My heart sank. Was she pulling away? Or was she just as scared as I was? I didn't know, and the not knowing was killing me. The complications kept piling up. Mark started coming home earlier, and I'd see them together more often, holding hands at a neighborhood barbecue, laughing at some private joke. It felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I'd lie awake, replaying every moment with Emily, trying to figure out if I was delusional. Was I reading too much into her kindness? Was she just lonely, using me to fill a void? Or was there something real between us? Her texts got longer, more frequent, sometimes late at night. One message, sent at 2 a.m., stopped me cold. I can't stop thinking about our talks. I stared at my phone for an hour, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Before I typed, me neither. It felt like a confession, like I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. I tried to pull back, to put distance between us. I'd leave for work early, come home late, skip our late-night talks. But it only made things worse. I missed her voice, her laugh, the way she made me feel like I wasn't alone. One night, I caved. I saw her outside, watering her plants, and I couldn't stop myself. I went out, and we talked like nothing had changed. But it had. There was this weight between us, this unspoken truth neither of us could face. Then came the night that broke me. It was a rainy evening, and I was home alone when someone knocked on my door. It was Emily, soaked from the rain, her eyes red like she'd been crying. She said she needed to talk, that she couldn't keep it in anymore. My heart was pounding as she sat on my couch, her hands trembling. She told me Mark had been offered a job in another state, and they were moving in a month. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. She looked at me, her voice barely a whisper, and said, "I don't know if I can go with him." I froze. Was she saying what I thought she was? I wanted to ask, to beg her to stay, to tell her I loved her. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just sat there, my mind racing with 1,000 what-ifs. What if she left? What if she stayed? What if I told her how I felt and ruined everything? The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating, until she stood up and said, "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have come here." She left, and I didn't stop her. The next few weeks were a blur. Emily and I barely spoke. I'd see her outside, but she'd avoid my eyes, and I didn't push. I was drowning in guilt, anger, and heartbreak. I kept thinking about that night, her words, the way she looked at me. I wanted to believe she felt something too, but maybe I was wrong. Maybe I'd built it all up in my head. Then, one morning, I saw a moving truck in their driveway. My heart sank. I stood at my window, watching as boxes were loaded, as Mark directed the movers with his usual efficiency. Emily was nowhere in sight. I thought that was it, that she was gone, and I'd never know what could have been. But that evening, I found an envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a sketch, a rough, beautiful drawing of a stormy sea, all wild waves and jagged cliffs, signed with her initials. On the back, she'd written, "You made me remember who I am. I'm sorry I couldn't be brave enough." My hand shook as I held it, the paper crinkling under my fingers. She was gone. I don't know if she went with Mark or left on her own. I don't know if she loved me or if I was just a moment in her life, a fleeting escape from whatever weight she carried. But that sketch, it's all I have left of her. I look at it every day, pinned above my desk, and it hurts, but it also reminds me that for a brief, impossible moment, I felt something real, something that cracked me open and changed me forever.